Hello, everyone. The 0 people who are out there watching right now. My name is Grayson Hester, pronouns he, him, his. I am the communications director at the Faith Community. And who we got there on the other side of the screen?
My name is Josh Carpenter. My pronouns, I use third-person pronouns as well as, third-person neutral pronouns as well as third-person masculine pronouns. So him, his, as well as they. Yeah.
Awesome. So hello, everyone. As you're coming in, please be sure to say hey. If you feel so inclined, if your heart feels strangely warmed to do so, please leave a comment to let us know you're here. Share this, like this. Christian's here with 4 exclamation points, so he's real excited. We can't let him down. He's hyped this up. So yeah, share this, like this, react to it. And just let us know along the way what thoughts you have, if you have any questions, and we'll do our best to at least acknowledge them, if not respond to them. So today, Josh and I, and Myron is here with a ton of L's.
That's a lot of L's, Byron.
How would you say that, Josh?
Yo.
Hey, y'all. And Callie's here just for a minute. So we hope we can make it a wonderful minute that you'll never forget. Yeah, so good to see y'all, all of the people coming in. Exactly. Myron said that's exactly what it is. Continue to interact with us. Say what, Josh?
Glad we got it right.
Yes. And as Christian said, please hit the share button. He also put 4 exclamation points on that because, he's serious. Angela, we are cutting up already. It's just what we do for such a frivolous topic as anti-racism. Certainly one that doesn't deserve seriousness. Sarcasm. But yeah, that's what we're talking about today. So all month long, so many exclamation points. Christian's basically in an anime right now. Or a Japanese video game. I had complete faith in y'all. He misspelled it there, though. He didn't put the... Anyway, all right. So we, all month long at the Faith Community, have been featuring in some of our posts one of our 5 keys, anti-racism. It is the first key past Greatest Commandment Theology, because GCT, and we'll get into more of this later, but of course, Greatest Commandment Theology, curated by Pastor Christian A. Smith, but in my heart, he's the only Smith. And it is about how when we love our neighbors,
Grayson?
God is defined by how we love our neighbors. And naturally out of that flows anti-racism. And so in typical white American fashion, we thought that the best people to talk about anti-racism are one of the few white members at the church. But in all seriousness, Josh and I both decided, as queer white men people from East Tennessee who went to Carson Newman, that it might be an interesting perspective to hear why we go to a church that espouses anti-racism and values it so much. And just to hear our perspective is like, what that's like and how we interact with it. So Josh, I'll let you go first. Approach it any way you like. I know you can take it any direction you want to, so I have complete faith, just like Myron. But yeah, just address the question, like, why are you at an anti-racist church when you don't have to be, and you're not a person of color?
Well, I think that the best answer to that is by telling a story, and it's a story of how I came to realize just how big a problem racism is. And that largely came about during the 2016 election cycle, as well as my experience here at FSU. I began to realize in 2016, when I was looking for a congregation here in Tallahassee, that I was going to have trouble finding one. And one of the reasons why is something my advisor said to me, is that the Episcopal Church here, while it is while it is very, very inclusive of queer folks, he said that it's also very white.
Mm-hmm.
And that struck me for a second, because I remember like realizing in seminary and during my time at Carson Newman that the church spaces that I found myself in were very, very white. In fact, having a Hispanic member or a African American member or a Asian American member was the exception and not the rule.
Right.
And so once I started learning about the history of race in America and how it's bigger and more divisive and more complicated and more painful than just slavery. Slavery would have been enough in and of itself, but there is so much more to unravel, y'all. I don't have the time here, nor do I have the resources available to me to explain that to you, but trust me when I say that we have a huge, huge problem when it comes to race in America. And it is not a problem that we have resolved. It wasn't magically fixed when they passed the Civil Rights Act in the 60s. It wasn't magically fixed when Barack Obama went into office. And it certainly isn't magically fixed now that we have successfully prosecuted cops who have murdered George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
We still have those problems. And I realized, as a function of my own growth and my own study, that I had to participate in a church that was also committed to anti-racism out of my own Augustinian convictions. And by Augustinian, I mean convictions that Augustine, the guy way back when, had, that we have to work to minimize the amount of evil in the world. Racism is evil. Therefore,
here we go.
It's the church's responsibility to work actively against sources of evil. And being anti-racist in name only is easy. Actually doing the work, getting out there and standing for people and people's rights is another matter entirely. And I am so thankful that this congregation is willing to do that work.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. I really appreciate how you fused sort of your own history into the broader history. I think that really helps us understand that even as white people who were not part of chattel slavery. I mean, my ancestors being Irish may have been enslaved at one point, but certainly not within the racialized chattel system of slavery that built this country. We can sometimes divorce ourselves from that history and almost as if we are not beholden to it or not a product of it. And so I really appreciated your weaving the two, where it's like, no, we're firmly within this and benefit from this and are knit together spiritually just as people, but knit together in this shared evil and this shared trauma and all of these things. So I'd be interested to hear, based off something you said towards the end about being anti-racist in name only versus being anti-racist in practice, or as us academics love to say, praxis. We love it. So what might be, and you don't necessarily have to name specific names, you can if you want, but what might be an example or an instance of a church that is anti-racist in name only?
Progressive white churches love to say that they're anti-racist. And my question to them, and what's rubbed me the wrong way in the past and continues to rub me the wrong way now, is if you're really anti-racist, why does your church service look so white? Why are there so many white people in your pews? Not that white people going to church is a problem. That's not what I'm trying to say. Rather, what I'm trying to say is, if you are truly an anti-racist church community, why isn't your worship more welcoming, more inclusive to people who aren't white? That is a theological, a doxological, a praxis a practice point, you can do something about that. You can hire Black ministers. You can hire Latino, Latinx ministers. You can hire Asian American ministers. You can do those sorts of things to make your space more accessible to people who are not white. But that requires a true commitment to anti-racism rather than just a sort of lip service, something that you plaster on your church billboard that basically only serves the purpose of making you feel good.
Yeah. But, and so I think as minoritized people ourselves, just based off our sexual identity and based off the pronouns we share, gender identity as well. I'm cisgender, so I don't experience that in that way. Why is it not enough for you to go to one of the relatively few churches in the grand scheme of the world, the Western world, the US, the South? Why is it not enough for you to go to a church where you, as a queer person, are safe from harmful theology?
Because I don't think it's truly safe. Here's what I mean by that. I believe it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said that if there's someone out there who doesn't have rights, that jeopardizes everyone's rights. I could be wrong about quoting that, and if I am, somebody please correct me.
But the gist of it.
So it's not enough for a congregation to say, we support gay people, we support queer people, we support transgender people. Those are good things, don't get me wrong. But until you're willing to bite the bullet and say, no, our congregation is going to do the hard work of racial reconciliation, of welcoming non-white people into our ranks, of welcoming people who have different gender associations, different gender identities, different sexual identities, into their ranks, and to give them positions of authority, to give them positions of power, to allow them to affect the culture of the church, to make it truly a body made of many members, to use a metaphor that the Apostle Paul loved. Then it's not enough. It's not what it's not what's promised as part of our theological training, as part of what we expect from the church, at least what we should expect from the church. And it doesn't do the work of actually keeping anyone safe. You know, we all know that the Nazis came for Jews, but they also came for other people who were different,
right,
as well.
Homosexual being one of them, Black people being one of them, right.
That kind of evil is still present here in the United States. We call them white supremacists.
Or alt-right, or... Yeah. And,
you know, we cannot afford to pick and choose our battles. We have to come at this with a unified front if we are going to succeed in creating a more just and a peaceable living situation for all people.
And you see that as the work of the church?
Yes, very much so.
Why is that not just the work of the government?
It's not the work of the government because I'm an Augustinian. And because, according to Augustine, the state can never achieve justice apart from the church. The church has a civilizing, guiding influence upon the state to allow it to choose justice over injustice. Left to its own devices, the state can be more or less good. But with the church in play, then the state can rise above itself to a more just state, because the church knows justice in a way that the state doesn't, because the church has the presence of Christ.
So what about the 87% of white evangelicals?
I honestly wonder if that 87% of white evangelicals actually know Jesus. I'm just going to say it.
If we had the mic drop, I would totally press it. Wait, we might, but I'm not going to go looking for it. Bam, 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 bam. There it is. So Josh, in the pre-show, I said this wasn't going to turn into an interview, and it has. So if you have any questions, because you said you're going to be the only one talking.
No, like, I'm interested to hear how you've come to this position. I know that I'm willing to bet that Dave McNeely is hanging somewhere behind them, waiting to be talked about. So tell me about your story.
Yes, you are correct. So that's a Carson Newman inside joke. But so Dave McNeely, I feel like I have to start there. Dave McNeely was, when I was 7th to 12th grade, my youth minister. And I really do owe this political, theological orientation, and actually my sexual orientation too, because he's the first person I came out to, really to him. While he, at that time, I would not say, and he probably wouldn't say either, was at a point of like anti-racism or like progressivism or whatever you want to call it, leftism. There's kind of interchangeable terms. He definitely got himself and the youth group started on that path. So, you know, whereas every other Baptist youth group in East Tennessee, or at least in our area, was reading I Kissed Dating Goodbye and other things that I'm thankful I don't know. We were reading Shane Claiborne. We were reading Rob Bell. We were reading people who are really great gateway drugs, for lack of a better term. I have my problems with Shane Claiborne, but I think he does great work. I have my problems with Rob Bell. I think he does slightly better work. But whatever, Dave at least opened the door to further inquiry and let there be a journey at all, where I think a lot of white evangelical, Southern Baptist, moderate white Baptists don't even know that there's a journey to take, and just sort of shut it down. Or I guess it's sort of like how elephants, if you put sticks around them, they won't cross over because they're afraid of crossing the boundary. I feel like many white churches are like elephants that have never known anything other than sticks around them. And fortunately for Dave, there were no sticks around, so I was free to roam. So one concrete example, I read that stupid ass book, Myron. Didn't work for Myron. I know that from every time he talks. And then Christian said, I need to be informed of all the Carson Newman inside jokes. I should be considered an honorary. Listen, Christian, if you were an honorary alum, you would be gracing every brochure. You would be invited to speak until they learned what you believed. Because they'd be like, oh, one of our Black alumni, whatever. But Josh, here's an inside joke for Christian.
Yep.
Talons up. Yep. So this is like the Carson Newman sign. The mascot's the Eagles. And so, yeah, this is talons up. So next time you see Josh and me, here's your test. Talons up. So, yeah, a concrete example was, you know, Dave took me to Wild Goose Festival in 2011, which was the second year it had ever been in. It was the second year ever. And at that point, it was in Durham, or near Durham. And now it's in Hot Springs, which is like 45 minutes from Carson Newman. And, you know, I got to hear gay Christians talking, which resonated with me in a weird way that I didn't understand at the time, but was really scared of, and got to see, Gungor perform, who's still one of my favorite artists. And so that really helped me, where I had like a passion for justice, like ill-defined. I had a passion for social justice, and whatever that is, you know, I'm very interested in that. And then really it was through that door being opened, and then sort of in a very white liberal way, like knowing what I believed, but not exactly knowing why. Like I remember my sophomore year of college was when Ferguson happened and Michael Brown was murdered. And I knew that that was wrong. And I knew that what the protesters were doing was great. And I knew what side I was on, but I couldn't tell you really why. I couldn't tell you other than like, well, we can't judge people, so let's not. And so it really was when I transferred from Belmont to Carson Newman, because I forgot to say I started out at Belmont University, and then transferred to Carson Newman. And then Dave McNeely enters the picture again because he was the leader of Faith and Justice Scholars. And when I transferred, I wanted to be a part of it. I didn't need the scholarship, but I definitely needed the friends and the pushing. And so it was there through that and forensics and just breaking free from evangelical friends at Belmont and really discovering myself as a gay person really made me want to make good on the connection I felt to other marginalized people, if that makes sense. Because I remember when I came out, and this is such a white cis male thing to say, but when I came out to myself, I was like, oh shit, I'm a minority now. And I took that seriously. And I was like, that means that I can empathize with, align myself with people of color. And I didn't use that language at the time, and I'm not like patting myself on the back or like trying to make myself sound better. I literally said that. And then I think that was opening a process of making good on that. So the more that I came to love myself, the more that I, here's Gray's Commandment Theology, wanted to love other people in meaningful ways, wanted to love my friend Vincel, who was on the forensics team, and wanted to love the other very few Black students who were at Carson Newman. And it was just a process of me getting more and more passionate about it around the same time, actually, Josh. So like 2015, 2016 was when, and this is also very white, listened to my first hip hop album all the way through. And it was Damn by Kendrick Lamar. And I was like, if I feel this within myself, feel this call towards anti-racism, feel this passion for it as a subject and a living and a lifestyle, then I need to engage in the culture that I am trying to fight for and align myself with and learn from and love better. And so I decided to listen to music that I once said was just filthy and trashy, as many white people do. So I listened to Kendrick Lamar, and Michael Eric Dyson, Carson Newman's most famous alum, spoke. And I read his book, The Black Presidency, and read Ta-Nehisi Coates, and read Tears We Cannot Stop by Michael Eric Dyson. And then it was really off to the races from there. And so since then, I found myself really preferring, like, if I were in a setting where there was like a table of Black people and a table of white people, I would want to sit with the Black people. I would want to be like, I just feel drawn to that. I want to see what their lives are like, what they're talking about. I want to be friends with them. And I can't chalk it up to anything other than just something I feel called to. And so when I came to Atlanta, I was like, if I'm in Atlanta and I'm surrounded mostly by white people, I am making a racist choice of all cities. And so when I saw Christian at the first church fair of my McAfee career back in 2018, I didn't know that I would be joining his church. He had a shirt that I recognized. But it really just kind of flowed from there, and I just felt like I've been guided by that instinct and that calling, which you, I think, spoke about in very good theoretical and formal terms. But I just felt really drawn to it. And I also think the first day of our Down Low love affair, absolutely. I mean, he did flex for me. He was like, oh, I got Bad Theology Kills on my like gargantuan bicep. And I was like, oh my God. And it's just been true love ever since. Rumor has it there's still like a puddle of sweat that stained the carpet from my swooning. So yeah, and I just think, especially, with my queer identity, my gay identity, my white identity, like, for me to be gay and to not pursue anti-racism is essentially to just appropriate pride, appropriate really even the fact that I can claim this identity, because we owe it certainly to figures like Harvey Milk and others who I can't think of at the moment, but we also owe it predominantly to Black and trans and Black trans and Latinx and Asian trans people of color, queer people of color, for there being pride at all.
Right.
And so I think for me, just strictly personally, like if I don't pursue anti-racism, then I am still choosing whiteness. I'm still choosing a whitened version of gayness, which looks like leaving queer Black people behind, brown people behind when cures for HIV are being found. It looks like leaving the Black and brown queer people who helped make marriage equality reality behind when we achieved marriage equality, because that tends to be what white cis gay men do. ACT UP protested against, and I'll say this and then I'll go to you, Josh. ACT UP protested against, as we saw in Marsha P. Johnson's documentary, and yes, and Sylvia Rivera. Thank you, Callie. Protested against the middle class white cis gay men who were looking down on the protests from their penthouse apartments or from their, high rise offices. And that is not what I want to do. And so if I were to try to have a more radical, more left leaning queer identity and not have race part of that, what would I be doing? So that was a lot. And it was, again, sort of my personal story, sort of like how that intersects with the history and the theory that you spelled out. But yeah, you were going to say something, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I am excited to hear you talk because you put what I wanted to say in more like emotional and relational terms. And that's something that I struggle to do. So thank you for saying a lot of those things that I wish that I could have known how to say.
Thank you.
But, Audre Lorde, our lesbian Black sister, said to us that survival is not an academic skill. When I'm engaging in the work of anti-racism, it's a part of survival for me. I'm just going to be honest.
Okay.
Because the version of white queerness that is offered to us is destructive and it's self-destructive. If we are going to survive this late capitalistic hellscape that we find ourselves in, it's got to be in some way an embracing of the things that make us different in order to make us strong. Difference is strength. This is something that womanist thought teaches us better than anything else that I can think of. And, I'm learning from my Black brothers and sisters and my Black non-binary siblings.
Yeah.
I owe a lot to them because I would not be the academic or the person that I currently am without their writing. How in the world am I not going to engage in anti-racism?
Yeah. I see it as a, almost as like something, it's exponential. It's a cycle, it's an enclosed cycle that builds on itself. It's almost like, I don't know, I had an example, but it's late. So yeah, it's like a closed system that builds on itself because, you can't simply do any allyship work or really even self-work, because just because you have an identity doesn't mean you're educated about the theories and the how that identity fits into the world. But like, were I simply, oh my gosh, I'm just popular today. Were I simply to just like throw myself into community with Black people, not knowing anything about whiteness, not knowing anything about racism, then I would inevitably cause damage. But if I were simply to just educate myself and have book clubs, as we whites love to do, without actual engagement in community and relationship, then it just becomes a simply intellectual exercise or a performative exercise, anti-racist in name only, as you said. And so I think like to have both and more than that, but just these two that I'm thinking about, it's like if you have the education and the knowledge and the deconstruction and the spiritual work that you've done, hopefully on yourself as a white person, to unlearn the devotion to the idolatry of whiteness within yourself, then if that draws you into relationship, then you'll want to do more work because you love the people you're in relationship with, that you're able to be in relationship with because you weren't slavishly devoted to, as you said, this self-destructive white, and in our case, queerness. And so then you want to learn more because you love them. And then when something happens, you want to advocate for them because you love them. And then because you love them, you want to learn more.
Right.
And that draws you into deeper love. So it's a really beautiful compounding system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that I've fanboyed about Augustine a lot today, but I'm going to do so again. This kind of increasing
Who
love.
was North African, by the way, so we can
True.
include him in the.
This sort of increasing love is what happens when you get your loves ordered correctly. Because you love God, you're able to love people. Because you love people, you're able to love yourself. All of a sudden, we're back to greatest commandment theology. This is the sort of thing that is foundational to Christianity for me.
Mm-hmm.
And without the ability to love everyone radically, you don't have that. This is why I'm saying that those 80 some odd % of evangelicals are missing something, because their love only extends to themselves. It's a self-destructive love rather than a love that expounds and expands to include others.
It's like an entropy, like a closed system can't sustain itself, and their love is like, yeah. And it's like it goes against physics, right? Like the universe is always expanding. And so if we say that love is the fabric of the universe and love is that which stitches it all together, and that is constantly expanding, then if I want to be in rhythm with the universe, and if I want to be like the world that created me and that sustains me, then our love needs to be always expanding too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, that goes into creating the sorts of political systems that allow for the maximization of that kind of love. This is why I think that the church has a role in guiding the state towards being a more democratic organization, not like the Democratic Party, but rather in the sense that everyone is responsible for the maintenance of the government, for the maintenance of our laws and of our rules and regulations, and that the power of the government comes from the people itself. And so being anti-racist is also a mandate to be against the hegemonizing of power in these apparatuses like rampant capitalism. The fact that Jeff Bezos cannot pay taxes is abominable. And it's a sign that our democracy is weak.
Right.
Rather, part of the work of anti-racism has to be the work of expanding democracy and ensuring that everyone is responsible to and for every other person.
Mm-hmm. You said hegemonizing. Can you define that, please?
Yeah.
So,
I want you to think of like a stream of water that has been corralled in by a beaver dam. So then you're going to have a lot of water on one side of the dam and maybe just a little trickle on the other side.
Or hegemony, as it were.
Yeah. Hegemony is the stockpiling of power or water, to go back to my analogy,
right?
By the few, and the many are left with the trickle.
Okay. The trickle down, as it were. Yeah. And I think, man, so many directions that we could go with that. But I see it as something like I wrote about the good old 1%. And really the 1% of the 1%. So what I wrote about in a blog that I did for TFC, where I said you can't love whiteness and God at the same time. Essentially, I view it as like, so I, in a theological sense, am not white. And what I mean by that is like, that is not what God named me. That's not what God created me to be. I became white the minute that I was born, and had that placed on me. And then I assented to it and infused myself with it. And it is a social structure, a social status that essentially, like you said, is self-destructive and makes me feel I have to view myself better than, above, apart from, separate from other people. And that is antithetical. That is completely, it is just anti-God. It's anti-Christ to view yourself as disconnected from the people in whom in this great tapestry of reality, we are knit. Whiteness is predicated on, it was built on separation so that people could sleep well at night for getting their rum and their sugar and their spices by killing and raping and enslaving. That's why I'm white. That's why my fair skin is named white. And also my Irish ancestors willingly gave up Irishness to become it. And so I think if I don't challenge that, if I don't at least sit uncomfortable with it, and if I don't name it as such, like, you have to name the demons for them to come out of the body. Jesus shows us that. And if I don't challenge it, then I am essentially saying, yeah, it's okay for me to just like join hands with this demonic status that I didn't ask for, certainly didn't create, am not responsible for, but I am responsible to. And if I don't do that, then I don't really value salvation. I don't really value what Jesus did at the cross, because I'm valuing it as yet another commodity for me to shore up an investment that is called heaven. And so, yeah, I see salvation almost like an orthodox recapitulation theory, right? So like salvation is like pulling the plug back in, like returning to the essential self, returning to something that is lost. And I think whiteness is inhumane, unhuman, and to not fight against it is to not reclaim what is lost, which is essentially our humanity as white people.
Yeah, I think that there's something to be said for that, that whiteness, as it has been historically defined and is historically informed, has to be combated.
It's not neutral.
Yeah, it's definitely not neutral. It is self-destructive. It has become a way of loving one's self,
right,
in a negative sense, not in the positive sense that the greatest commandment theology would have us do. It is selfishness, not self-mindfulness.
Yeah, it's literally like not a full self. It's self-ish.
Yes. And I just think that in many ways, we have to reclaim our own history, that there's something that we've lost by taking on the moniker white.
Right.
And what we have lost is our humanity. If our humanity is predicated upon our ability to treat other humans as we want to be treated, I know that I'm getting into Kantian territory now, but you know, if our humanity depends on our ability to do that, then white people fail to be human. And we fail to be human every time that we execute extrajudicially black people in the streets of this nation.
And then also see footage of it and don't immediately feel maybe anything, or at least like, oh, this is wrong, or damn, I feel bad, or empathetic. Like if you can see the 9+ minute video, if you can hear about Breonna Taylor, Iana Dior, Rayshard Brooks, the list goes on, unfortunately. And your first response is defensiveness.
Yeah.
And not like, oh, wow, fellow human died.
Yeah. Or you look for a reason to excuse them being killed. Like they did something wrong. They should never succeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's inhumane.
Yeah.
And that speaks of a poverty of soul.
Yes.
For what? For power, for material goods, for what?
And, you know, I'm reminded of that saying of Jesus, what does it profit a person if they gain the whole world and lose their own soul? White people have lost their souls. That's all that there is to it.
Right.
We have to regain that.
Right. Exactly. It's not a hopeless situation. It's not like we're condemned, damned. Oh, well. It is something that we can do. It is something that we can unlearn to some extent. I'll go ahead and say should. But I think too, like, and to take it back to TFC and like why we're at an anti-racist church, it's like I want to be in communion with my soul. I don't want to be in communion with the shaming versions of Christianity that predominate mega churches, that value white aesthetics and cultures. There's a reason why worship music is worship and gospel is gospel. Like, whiteness is such that it's staked a claim on worship because you have chiming guitars and reverb pedals. Like, anyway, I'm going off on a tangent, but to go to TFC, to go to an anti-racist church is kind of it's out of self-love too. Because if I am devoting my life, if I'm serving one master, because you can only serve one, you can't serve two masters. If I'm serving the master of whiteness in where I go to church, how I spend my money, where I live, how I treat people, etc., then I'm not serving Jesus. It's mutually exclusive. The man himself said it. But also, like, I am cutting myself off, saying that I am not a part of the body. I'm essentially amputating myself spiritually, and I'm bleeding. But I'm calling it success, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah. And I'll just go ahead and throw in there, I am so sick of hearing about sin in white churches, because it always means either sexual sin or not giving enough money to the church or something else that we don't like, we being white patriarchy.
Right.
When I talk about sin, I want to talk about things that are actually going on that are wrong in the world.
And are killing people.
I can look at racism and say, that's something that's going on that is wrong in the world. It's very obvious for anybody who would have ears to hear and eyes to see.
Come on, somebody.
If we're going to talk about sin, let's talk about that sin. Let's talk about those sins. Let's talk about working on the social sins that actually kill people. The sins of racism, the sins of homophobia, the sins of sexism. Those sins kill people. Why would I waste my time worried about who's having sex with who and why when we're actually killing people?
Yeah. Well, we've got about 2 minutes. You have any final thoughts?
I think that my soapbox was just exhausted.
Gotcha.
I will say that I am very thankful to be in a place where I can exercise my ability, my gifts and talents towards the goals of anti-racism.
Same. I agree. Because if I were at a church that I couldn't do that, I would feel very frustrated and angry and stifled and wasted, and not in maybe in the alcoholic sense, but
and I've been there, and it's just exhausting and draining, and it makes you feel bad inside.
It does. And for those who feel called to be in churches that are not as open and receptive, I don't want to diminish, like, if there are white people who feel called to racist white churches or more overtly racist, like, that's your call, and that's great. That just doesn't resonate with me. I would just be like angry all the time. So I think, it's all hands on deck, takes all kind. Yeah, I agree. I'm grateful for it. I'm grateful for TFC. I'm grateful to Christian and the team and the members for creating this kind of environment where we get applause for this and not an angry email from the gray hairs in the back tomorrow. But yeah, so we have been Josh and Grayson talking about why we as whites and white queer men joined and would only join an anti-racist church. So if you've liked what you've heard today, we have this kind of stuff all the time. Next month is Power and Pride, because it is both Pride Month and Juneteenth. So expect more stuff like this. Yes, snaps for all that. You couldn't tell, Josh is a little bit gay. You can tell from the shirt and the bag. Yeah, so expect more like this. Saturday, we are worshiping. It is about salvation. That is our May theme. So we hope to see you there, Facebook or YouTube at 4:00 p.m. Eastern Daylight Savings Time. And we have this again on the 3rd Thursday of June. It was on the 4th Thursday of May. That's my fault. I'll blame graduation. But every other Thursday we have I Just Need a Minute, which is more meditative and soothing and not ranting and soapboxing. So yeah, anything else you want to add, Josh, before we sign off?
Just that it was a pleasure to be here with you and to hear your story and to be able to share my own.
Absolutely. I agree. All right, y'all. Have a great night. Love yourselves, love others, and by extension, love God, all that good stuff.